My name's Colin Renwick. I'm a GP and I work for Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven CCG, and I'm one of the executive GPs on the management board for the CCG. So I sit on the board. I've got various roles within that as like a portfolio. So I'm responsible for urgent care, for prescribing, and then for the general decisions that the commissioning decisions that the CCG make, and at times we have to take responsibility for particular issues that arise, and the Castleberg Hospital issue, which we're going to discuss, was one of those issues that I took responsibility for as the lead, because I had worked in that area and I knew a lot about the hospital and the type of patients who were looked after there. So Castleberg Hospital is an old workhouse hospital which is in Settle, so it's a very isolated rural community in the Dales, and it's a building which was built in the 19th century. It looks after people, elderly people mainly, who either need to be looked after out of hospital, who aren't appropriate for going into the acute Airedale Hospital, but maybe palliative care, people who've had a fall, things like that. At the beginning of 2017, the people who run the hospital, that's Airedale NHS Foundation Trust, had to close it very suddenly because of two issues. One was with the drainage of the hospital, and the secondly was with the electrics in the hospital. So they felt it wasn't safe to go on looking after patients there. So the building had to be shut, and we had to undertake a study about what we were going to do regarding these services. Were we going to reopen the hospital or not? And this had to be done in conjunction with the actual owners of the hospital, which is called NHS Property Services. So it was a three-way thing: the commissioners, the people who provide the services, and the owners. We all had to discuss what was going to happen with this, and because the potential was that we might actually permanently close the hospital, that was something that had to be put out to public consultation. So there was an enormous amount of public anxiety. The hospital had actually been closed temporarily back at around 2009, and at that time it was touch and go whether it reopened, and there was a lot of anxiety at this time that the hospital wouldn't reopen, and that actually what was being done was being almost manipulated, so we were like making it close and saying that it wasn't viable to keep it open anymore. So the three options that were up for public consultation were: one, that we would just spend the money, reopen the hospital as it was. Second one was that we actually would rebuild the hospital as a completely new facility somewhere within that area. And the third one would be that it would remain permanently closed, and that we would use the money that we normally spent on running that facility on beefing up the community services, so that the care could be made in the community. People would be looked after in their homes, or perhaps in a few beds that we might commission from care homes. So we underwent the pre-engagement, and we were saying to the public, these are the three options that we think are viable. Have you got any others that you can come up with? And we did a lot of engagement all around the local community regarding that. It quickly became apparent that actually the rebuilding option was never going to be affordable, that there wasn't going to be money to knock down and build a completely new facility. So when it came to the consultation, there were really just the two options, and that was to spend the money to reopen it, or to close it permanently and to enhance the community services. So we had meetings with the clinical senate, both face-to-face and by telephone conference, particularly with the chair, Mr. Osobsky, and they pulled in experts in the field, which is what they're good at doing, people who can actually look at the evidence and might have experience of similar issues that have occurred elsewhere. And their actual recommendation their actual advice was that enhancing the community services was a valid option, that it did stand up against treating people as inpatients in cottage hospitals, and that if that decision was made, that it was a valid decision to have been made, which was met with current thinking. We found it really excellent. That I think they were really supportive. They were interested. They pulled together a really good panel of people to look into all of the issues across a whole spectrum. So through social services, through lay people, through people with general practice experience of intermediate care, and people for elderly medicine who have experience of intermediate care. So it was a really broad spectrum of people, which we found really useful to have that assurance that if we were to take that decision, that it was supported by current evidence.